what has happened since Maidan, and what are the prospects for the future?
Thank you. Olena, it's been now already 6 years since Euromajdan revolution, and essentially we can analyze what happened during the presidency of Poroshenko, the first president after Euromajdan revolution, who was elected and who was in charge initially of Ukrainian transformation and reforms after Maidan. And as we can summarize that during his time, Ukraine moved closer to the European Union and NATO. Ukraine got a visa-free regime, but unfortunately inside the country we didn't see much of the reform, and there was not enough political will to fight corruption and change the existing system inside Ukraine. And because there was this common frustration among people with his presidency and his failure to deliver on his promises, a new president was elected, Volodymyr Zelensky, in 2019, and some analysts call this an electoral revolution because he did not belong to political class. He was an outsider. He was a comedian, popular among people. And he promised that he indeed will fight corruption and reform Ukraine in a way that Poroshenko didn't want to do. So Poroshenko was not elected for the second term, and Zelensky was elected as a president, and which is even more important, he was supported so much by society that he was able to form the single party majority in the parliament for the first time, essentially, in Ukrainian history. His party, People's Servant, took 2/3 of the parliament seats, and they were able, initially in 2019, for around 6-7 months, they were able to implement some of the reforms that previous government failed to deliver. They basically stripped members of parliament of their immunity, which Ukrainians wanted. They were able to relaunch some of the anti-korruption institutions, such as National Agency for Corruption Prevention. They were able to introduce land reform legislation. And initially, the government that Zelensky team appointed was very progressive. They were all young, reform-oriented, not connected to any oligarchs. But within 6 months, Zelensky sacked this government, and since then, like, a new government was appointed, and the pace of reform significantly slowed down. Generally, the policy of the new president has been very chaotic when it comes to appointments. We are now struggling here in Ukraine with this fake narrative about so-called Sorosiata, children of Soros, pro-Western reformers versus kind of old post-Soviet strong leaders. And essentially, a lot of oligarchs and Russian interest is also participating in this manipulation on TV channels, when essentially Zelensky now is surrounding himself and appointing more and more of people who I would say are not pro-reform and pro-Western. And currently we have a mix of key people responsible for reforms who do not agree with each other. Generally, there is still consensus, of course, that Ukraine is moving to the West, to NATO, to EU, but some things, of course, are getting out of control because the grip on power that Zelensky has is weak. And as a result of this, their situation with corruption in Ukraine, according to even Transparency International Corruption Perception Index, worsened in 2019. When we compare, the year before, Ukraine was occupying 120th place in the ranking among 180 countries. And In 2019, it was already 126 out of 180, which essentially makes us the most corrupt country in Europe, more corrupt than Moldova, Belarus, Poland, Slovakia. Only Russia has worse result than us, 137th place. And this is because, of course, common citizens, they don't see any improvement when it comes to corruption. As you might have heard, the Anti-korruption court was launched in September of 2019, and it has been in place now for 1 year. So there is some progress, but this progress is very small. Within a year, they carried out 16 decisions, 15 of them guilty, 1 non-guilty and not guilty, and only 6 people were sentenced to have jail time. And if we compare before, in the last 4 years, when already these anti-korruption institutions that were created after Euromajdan-revolution were in place, and such as National Anti-Korruption Bureau and Special Anti-Korruption Prosecutor, if we compare to post-Maidan time, without existence of this anti-korruption court, there were only 2 people were sent to jail when we speak about political corruption. So there is a progress, 2 people in 4 years and 6 people in 1 year. So, but it is of course minor. And the big politicians, big officials, big fish as they call it, nobody was sent to jail. And of course, common citizens perceive it as lack of punishment, lack of anti-korruption fight. And this is why the perception is that things are getting worse. And my observation as a professional working in the field of international development and anti-korruption is that right now corruption became more decentralized. I call this situation corruption anarchy. It's when different parts of society, different institutions, people are using their entrusted power for their personal gain wherever they can. A policeman uses his position, a judge uses his position or her position, local governor, city mayor. It's just customs office, even those who construct roads. And central government doesn't have control over this, and this is why it's not looking good for citizens. And moreover, just the most recent development was even more dramatic. It's essentially the decision of the Constitutional Court to cancel responsibility for illicit enrichment and block the work of the National Corruption Prevention Agency. This is the agency that was responsible for checking all electronic declarations of government officials. That was one of the achievements of Maidan revolution, that Ukraine launched an electronic system of asset declarations, and then this system was used to hold officials accountable for their spending for situations that are very common in Ukraine when they could not explain the origin of their wealth. So Constitutional Court just canceled this, basically threatened the whole system of anti-korruption institutions, and this was actually one of the conditions of the visa-free regime. So now all our international partners are worried and waiting for Ukraine to solve this and essentially roll back this decision of the Constitutional Court to be able to have this architecture of anti-korruption institutions and continue the anti-korruption reform.
Thank you very much. So, as we can see from this very nice and comprehensive overview, fighting corruption at all levels basically remains one of Ukraine's biggest challenges. And ongoing anti-corruption reforms, they remain subject to daily headlines, but it seems that the progress is very, very slow and very piecemeal. To conclude with a question which is now being discussed by a few experts and community, is also interested about maybe reasons of the situations and the fact that a lot of attention has been placed on reforming specifically anti-corruption bodies about which you were talking, and less attention was paid to the rule of law, establishing rule of law, and maybe reforming judiciary, which is a bigger, more daunting task, but which essentially still remains at the root of the problem.
Yeah.
Maybe you could say a couple of sentences about your view on that.
Absolutely. We can say that now, as so many years already passed since Euromajdan-revolution and the launch of the anti-corruption reform, there have been some lessons learned. And one of the key lessons is that indeed there was this idea shared by civil society and international partners of Ukraine that if we build new institutions instead of reforming old institutions and empower those institutions to fight corruption, we will be able to have significant progress in anti-corruption reform. And as a result, we had these institutions created, as I mentioned, National Agency for Prevention of Corruption, National Anti-Corruption Bureau, then Specialized Corruption Prosecutor's Office, and High Anti-Corruption Court. But those institutions, they were only dealing with political corruption, which is still a narrow number of cases if we talk about the whole society. In the meantime, there was almost no progress made in reforming judiciary, the courts around the country, the trial courts, courts of appeal, Supreme Court was not reformed properly, and also police reform essentially failed. Reform of security service didn't take place. Also, reform of the prosecutor office didn't take place. So essentially, the law enforcement bodies, the judiciary, they are not reformed. And right now, there is much more attention to judiciary because many understood that they are at the heart of Ukrainian corruption. Unfortunately, Ukraine, after the collapse of USSR, has built a system of judiciary which is independent to a certain extent. They have a lot of powers. At the same time, they are misusing those powers for corruption purposes. They are not really serving to achieve justice and rule of law in Ukraine, but they are pursuing their personal interests for their personal gain. And moreover, they created a system where they have bodies that are covering up corrupt judges, and those bodies are formed of judges, such as High Council of Justice. And when common people are complaining of corruption in judiciary, their High Council of Justice is supposed to sack judges for corruption. Also, the judges are immune to different law enforcement investigations. In many cases, it's very, very difficult to prove that a judge was bribed unless you catch the judge at the moment of bribery. And as a result, the system is protecting itself, and it became so powerful that even Ukrainian president doesn't have power to do much about it. And this drew attention of our international partners, such as the IMF. Right now, the reform of judiciary, specifically the High Council of Justice, is one of the conditions for Ukraine to receive the next tranche. We still depend upon the external assistance because economic situation is still not good. There is very high budget deficit. Also, our European partners, EU, they now put reform of judiciary on top of the list, which is right. And I wish it was done right after Maidan, because we lost all those years, and now we don't have satisfying results.
Thank you very much. I thank you very much for sparing your time and sharing your expert opinion with us.
Yeah, thank you, Olena.